in this way, as he was accustomed to do. This temptation is easily discovered by the restlessness and disquiet with which it begins, and by the tumult which it causes in the soul all the time it lasts. Likewise, by the obscurity and trouble which it produces, and by a dryness and indisposition to prayer, or to any good at all. For it seems both to stifle the soul and to bind up the body, so that it is fit for nothing. But true humility, though the soul knows herself to be wicked and is grieved in considering what we are, and exaggerates her wickedness as greatly as I have already mentioned, and through these her sins are felt to be such, comes not with any disorder, nor does it disturb the soul, or overcloud her, or cause in her any aridity, but rather comforts her, and proceeds in a quite contrary way, with gentleness, sweetness, and delight. For though she is troubled on one hand, yet she is comforted on the other, to see what a great favor our Lord bestows upon her, in allowing her to feel that pain, and in considering how well employed it is. She grieves, indeed, for having offended God, but then, on the other hand, His mercy cheers her up, and she has light to be confounded at herself, and to praise His majesty for having borne with her so long. But in that other humility which the devil suggests, there is no light for anything that is good, but it seems to the soul as if God were ready to put everyone to fire and the sword. He represents the divine justice to her, and though she has faith in God's mercy, because the devil has no power to destroy that, yet she believes in such a manner that her faith gives her no comfort, but rather when she considers God's great mercy. The tempter makes this serve for her greater torment, because she thinks she ought to have served God so much the more. This is a stratagem of the devil, and one of the most painful, the most subtle and disguised that I have ever known, and therefore I wish your reverence, lest perhaps he might endeavor to tempt you in this way, to gain some light, and to know him well, if he leave you understanding enough to do so. But do not fancy that knowledge and learning will be sufficient for this purpose. For, though I want all this, yet now as I have escaped from him, I clearly see that what he says is foolery and madness. I am sensible that our Lord is pleased to permit this temptation, and allow him leave to act thus, just as he tempted Job, though, as I am so wicked a creature, he does not suffer the enemy to tempt me with so much fierceness. It happened to me once, and I remember it was on the day preceding the eve of Corpus Christi, a festival to which I am much devoted, though not so much as I ought to be. At that time this following event lasted but one day, but at other times it lasted for a week or a fortnight, and sometimes for 3 weeks or more, especially during Holy Week, which used to be my delight in point of prayer. Methinks on these occasions our Lord surprises my understanding in an instant with certain things, sometimes so very trivial, that other times I would only have laughed at them, and he makes it stoop to whatever he pleases, so that the soul remains chained to it, without being mistress of herself, or being able to think of anything, except those impertinencies which the temptation represents, and which have no substance at all, but serve only to choke the soul in such a manner as not to allow her to be mistress of herself. Hence, I sometimes have thought, that the devil goes playing with the soul, as men would do with a ball, and she in the meantime has no means of delivering herself from their power. It cannot be expressed how much she suffers in this case, and though she goes and seeks for some remedy, God permits her not to have any. She only retains, and this she always does, the power of her free will, though it is not clear, but like a man who has his eyes shut. And just as a person who has frequently gone along the same way, who, though it were by night in the dark, yet knows where he may be in danger of stumbling, because he had noticed the same path in the daytime, and thus he walks free from that danger. So it happens to the soul, which now seems, merely through custom, not to offend God. I speak not here of that protection our Lord gives her, which, however, is of the greatest importance. Her faith then becomes dead, or at least asleep, as her other virtues also are, though yet they are not utterly lost, for she believes what the Church teaches, and she pronounces it with her mouth, while, on the other side, the devil so harasses and deadens this faith, that she seems only to have such a knowledge of God as men have of things which they hear at a distance. Her love also is so lukewarm, that if she hears God spoken of, she hearkens in such a manner as to believe He is what He is, because the Church teaches the doctrine, but she has lost all memory of what she has experienced in herself. To go and pray, or remain in solitude, is only to increase her affliction, for the torment which she then feels within herself, and yet without knowing the cause, is, in my opinion, insupportable. It is a kind of picture of hell, as our Lord Himself was once pleased to make me understand, in a vision He gave me. Here the soul burns within herself, without knowing by whom or by what means she is set on fire, or how to escape from it, or how to quench it. For as to seeking to help herself by reading, it is like as if she could not read. I happened one day to read the life of a saint, to see if I could relish it, and thus comfort myself by the consideration of what he suffered. Accordingly I read half a dozen lines 4 or 5 times over, but though everything was written in my own tongue, I understood the account less at the end than I did at the beginning, and so I gave over reading. This happened to me many times, and I remember it particularly. To engage in conversation at that time is much worse, for the devil fills us with such an unbearable spirit of anger that it seems as if I could devour everyone, without doing anything more. Yea, and methinks I act well in forbearing to do it, and that God shows him who is placed in this circumstance of particular favour, by preserving him from doing or saying anything against his neighbour, whereby he might prejudice him and offend God. As to going to my confessor, what I shall here relate is certain, for it has happened to me very often, viz., that though they were saints with whom I treated at that time, and do still consult, yet they uttered such harsh words, and rebuked me with such asperity, that when I afterwards repeated their words, they themselves would be amazed at them, and they told me it was not in their power to do otherwise. For though they fully resolved within themselves not to do it, and at other times had not only compassion on me, but even a kind of scruple to treat me so severely, when I was so full of affliction both in body and mind, and though they had resolved to comfort me with kindness, yet they were not able to do it. They did not, however, use such ill language towards me as to offend God thereby, but they would use words as offensive as could be heard from a confessor, intending thereby to mortify me. And though at other times I could have endured this with joy, yet then it became a torment to me. Sometimes I thought I had deceived them, and then I would go to them, and advise them in good earnest, to be on their guard against me, lest I might deceive them. I knew well, however, that I would not wilfully deceive them, nor tell them a lie. But the truth is, I was afraid of everything. There was a certain person, who having heard of this temptation of mine, advised me not to be troubled at it, for though I should wish to deceive him, yet that he would have sense enough not to let me. That which often gave me great comfort, at least most frequently, was that I used to have some respite after I had communicated, and sometimes in the very instant of approaching the Blessed Sacrament, I became so perfectly well both in soul and body, that it amazed me. For it seemed that all the darkness of my soul was dispersed in a moment, and that upon the rising of this sun, I immediately discovered those fooleries wherein I was engaged. At other times, by hearing only one word which our Lord spoke to me interiorly, such as, "Be not afraid," or "Be not afflicted," I remained perfectly well, and sometimes also by seeing some vision I became as if nothing ailed me. I then regaled myself with God, and complained to Him for permitting me to suffer such great torments, though He repaid me well, because these afflictions were always followed with a great abundance of favours. Methinks the soul here comes, like gold, pure and refined out of the crucible, by seeing our Lord within her, and then all those troubles are accounted little which before seemed insupportable, and she desires to suffer them again, if our Lord could be served the better by them, and even to endure still greater persecutions and tribulations, provided they could be endured without offending God. She rather rejoices to suffer for Him, since all tends to her greater gain, though I never did bear them as I ought, but very imperfectly. At other times, troubles came upon me in another way, and this too so suddenly, that methinks I am then deprived of the possibility of thinking anything good, or of desiring to do it, for that I have a body and soul which are utterly useless and burdensome. But at these times I am not subject to these other temptations and disquiets, but only to a disgust for all things, without knowing why, so that nothing can give content to my soul.